Hello, my name is James Malone. I'm the CTO at SciBite. So today I'm going to talk about the role of data science in the midst of a global crises. Something probably a lot of us have been thinking about is, certainly I have, is about what our skills, experience, expertise is in relation to the challenges that we face today in the life science. So how can the things we do positively impact the way research and development is being done into treatments and into vaccines. And I'm sure it's something that a lot of people think about. In fact, I know it is because I speak to people in this field, and a lot of people doing that same sort of introspection, asking themselves, well, what is my role? So I'm going to take this 50 minutes just to talk a little bit about what I think at least some of our role is at SciBite, and more generally, how what we do as data scientists can have a positive impact in what's going on, and learning those lessons early and putting them into action as quickly as we can. I'm not the only one for sure individually, but also there are plenty in the data science community more broadly who are thinking about this too. They've published various reports on this and reflections on how they think data science can impact what's going on. So people like the Research Data Alliance, the Go Fair Consortium, might due to NIH, the NLM, and the White House, who released their own body of data on publications for use by the machine learning community. Plenty of people are thinking about this now, and there's a lot of rallying around to think about how data scientists can do something positively to influence what's going on and have some impact. So let me go through a little bit of the summaries of some of these publications. So the sorts of challenges we face where we think data sciences may have an impact and may be useful. So a large amount of data coming out now, a lot of publications. So we have to think about how we deal with the volume and the velocity of those publications as they come out. It's nothing new to anyone working in the life sciences having a lot of data. But of course, this has happened on this topic specifically over a very short period of time. So it's quite acute what we're seeing, but is a good microcosm of what's gone on over the last 20 years. So how do we deal with that? Common data and metadata standards pop up a lot in reports on data science use. How do we align what we're doing so we can share data and integrate and so on? I think we have a lot of good common data standards and metadata standards now. We have a lot of standards, we have a lot of ontologies in this space. Yes, there may be some gaps, but we have a lot there, and we have a lot of tooling too, I think. So we're in quite a good place. I think this is we have tried and tested methods in this space now, I think. We do need to make this metadata description actionable, so it needs to be machine readable so we can crunch it through computational approaches and use it. And this also impacts into things like traceability, so working out where the data came from, so we can trace back to the source. And also for things like facilitating and enhancing the way we build machine learning models from this data too, particularly in things like deep learning. So the metadata here can have an impact in how we build these models too. There's aspects of collaboration. So yes, building metadata is one thing that requires collaboration, but also in how we share data sets. Clearly, there's tons of collaboration going on globally in how we do R&D across the world. But also we have to think a little bit about how we share the best practices for what we do when we collaborate too. And then the final thing, which I have some nice examples on, is about adapting to novel data collection, which I'll touch on a bit later. So how the ways we're capturing data has changed a lot, at least in the UK, over the last 7-8 months. And we're learning a lot from that. So I think, and that will only continue, no doubt. So what can we learn? How can we improve that going forward? So volume and velocity, as I said, nothing new. Good reflection in the last 20 years will show very similar sized graphs, I'm sure. But if we kind of look at the stats on peer-reviewed publications and in preprint servers, research that's focusing on COVID-19, you can see from January, we start with a small-ish handful, though given it's a new problem, emerging virus. We have 200 publications roughly in January, and by the time we get to August, we have 24,000. So there's a huge increase in the space of 8 months. So that presents an amazing opportunity for people working in this space to be able to do something impactful, but it does also present problems. How do you find the most relevant bits of data and that signal we're interested in? And that ultimately is a data science problem. So it presents to us a search challenge. How can we improve the retrieval precision of what we're interested there? There are other challenges associated. Where do you put your data? So where does a user who comes along to a platform, where do they decide ultimately they'll put their data when they're finished, or their research report? It's quite easy, having done some of this, it's quite easy to get lost in the noise. When we went to deposit some data somewhere, we found you could see clinical studies mixed in with data science modeling. In Silico, you can find some person's hypotheses in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet also in the same buckets. So this also presents a challenge, I think. Where can you get the data published quickly, even if it is extremely relevant? How do you get that out there too? So that's a bit of a problem too. It's another challenge, I think. Another is, how can you help people answer questions? So if you want to ask a real world question of these things and not just keyword searches, so what is a mechanism of action for a drug? What drugs share this target that I'm interested in, etc. We need approaches that can understand the language and the phrasing of these questions. They need to be able to understand the important entities, the important biological entities in these questions. What is the drug in there? What is the verbs they're interested in, connecting these things together? How do we connect these things to other highly relevant and related data of interest? So starting with the drug is one thing, but we will want to understand the spectrum of relationships that attach it to other entities, so adverse events or other mechanisms of actions, et cetera, et cetera. So things that we're interested in more broadly. And you're working in target validation, you want this big spectrum of evidence. We need to be able to hook these things together in some way. This requires the ability to understand what we're looking for and what the other things we're connecting to are as well. So this requires some degree of, again, standards and a bit of understanding and semantics at play. Data collection part, which is a really interesting field and emerging in this self-reporting application space. So we all know about publications, we all know about public databases. We're all very grateful for the work done in serving up good curated public data. There's also emerging data types, so things like sewage, which is emerging as potentially a good proxy for areas of geography spread. So this is something that's emerging. Do we have the right data types to cover that? Do we have the right metadata? So that's something that we'll have to respond to quickly if that starts taking off at scale. Something that's definitely taken off at scale is the self-reporting applications that we have. So if you're probably from South Korea, Japan, this probably isn't new to you. It is if you're in the UK, certainly new to me. Having an application used by over 4 million people now in the UK, where they're self-reporting how they're feeling every day. So it captures basic data like who you are, your age, your weight, your ethnicity, geographical information, where are you now, where do you live? Where are you frequenting every week? Are you seeing a lot of people? Are you not? That sort of stuff. And yes, temporal information therein, so not just the where and the when. And then the ability to capture symptoms in 2 different ways. So it's the application that I'm talking about, that I'm using every day to self-report whether I'm feeling well or not. If you see you aren't feeling well, it will ask you a series of questions. So there's control questions. Do you have this symptom? Yes or no? Do you have been skipping meals, et cetera, et cetera? Do you have a fever? That kind of thing. Then at the bottom, there's this really actually very valuable free text field, which gives you the opportunity to write anything else that you're thinking about, which may be out of the ordinary, any of the symptoms that you think are important that you want to share with them. So that presents an amazing opportunity, an amazing challenge. You could be faced potentially with millions of people writing symptoms that they've thought of into this text space. So how do we mine that? How do we make the use of that? How can we pull out some of the signal we're interested in and harmonize that? And that indeed has been done to this application. So before the UK had added loss of smell as an official symptom, UK government, this app had found this very early on, that this was actually a very predictive symptom. And indeed published some studies on this too. So this was before it was officially recognized. They'd done this study, found it was a very good symptom as a discriminator for whether you were COVID positive or not. So giving us new information ahead of time, and also acting as an amazing early proxy for mass testing when mass testing was not available at the beginning of the outbreak for those early months. So something that presents an amazing opportunity and a brilliant advancement, but something we'll have to deal with from a data science point of view too. Something else we'll be doing is thinking about machine learning. A lot of people working in this space, there'll be a lot of talks about machine learning at BioIT this year, I'm sure. So things sometimes we don't think a lot about, or at least don't talk about openly. So the data preparation part of machine learning is one of the biggest, costliest, most time-consuming parts. How can we make that quicker? How can we make that easier? because it takes time to find a good training set, produce one, normalize it, think about what you want to include, think about your biases. What do you want to take out of those models? What about the missing entries that we don't have, so sparse data? What will we accept in terms of results? So is black box okay for some things? When is it not okay? And how do we take the output of that and use it? We want data from lots of sources, so machine learning may just be one part of that overall library. And who's using these approaches? How are they using them as well? How can we get it into the hands of people beyond just the machine learning experts as well? And of course, there's a cost. So there's some really good open language models, things that we actually build on top of too at SciBite, but we're grateful to have those, I think. If you want to build your own from nothing, from scratch, it could potentially cost millions of dollars for the biggest models now. So this isn't something that's necessarily cheap to do as well. So thinking a little bit about work I've been involved with, things we do. So this pipeline of being able to build an ontology, take it as a vocabulary, apply it to data, and then release that data for doing things like search integration. This is a standard pipeline that we have at SciBite that we do with a lot of industry folks. This is something we've done in March, in fact, when the COVID-19 data set was released on the Kaggle website by the White House and co. So our response to that was to take that data and enrich it ultimately. So we took that data, we built quickly, collaboratively built an ontology, turned that into a vocabulary, covering things that are relevant to COVID, so certain strains, certain protein targets, indications, other drugs, genes, etc. Tag that using termite, and then release that into the public domain. So this is something we did very quickly, actually. And this just took a space of a few days. We took a pretty large data set, and built this and released it into the open domain. So this is something I think we are good at doing. We can take data and we can enrich it, add some semantics to it, link that to the ontologies of interest, and use that and release that. So that's something I think we are good at. And actually going through the exercise of doing it in March and having updated it since for the 6-month syncs, I think has been a good experience for us, that we have a good pipeline for doing these things. We're trying to learn from that and see about how we might do this in other approaches that we're investing in. So SciBite AI is something that's quite new to SciBite. We have a SciBite AI team now, and we're developing deep learning models to help us do things like language understanding, question and answering, relationship extraction. And one of our aims, much like a lot of our other tooling, is to think about how we can get that into the broadest set of hands that it's possible to do. So trying to give it to scientists, researchers, those sorts of people, application developers, and not just machine learning experts. So there's several considerations within that. So one is about, if you're going to do that, you need to think about the amount of data needed to train things. If you want to speed things up, what's the cost to build a model? Can we identify the model entities that we want to find? So that's something we are good at. We have tools for that. Can we train and test those as well? So we have a Python code, we have workflows like Amazon SageMaker, so we have a way of pushing that through a pipeline too. And then we have to have a mechanism for ingesting that and releasing that back out to people to use. And the way we will do that is by taking our infrastructure and ultimately taking the core behind that and wrapping that up in a Docker environment. So why is this useful? Why is this relevant? Well, it says that if we create models of interest, whatever it may be, whether it's protein targets or whatever, we can build those things and release them for more general use. As long as you know how to use a very basic REST API, pretty simple REST API, you can use some pretty powerful deep learning approaches underneath. So this means we're able to take this and deploy this in lots of different places and let lots of different people exploit the power of that too. So trying to think about that early point, how do we facilitate deep learning? This is one of the ways I think we can do that. There's still plenty of others I think we can plunge into. So summarization is not something we really do very much of, but I know what others are looking at. So if you have 24,000 documents, can you summarize them and get the salient facts out of that? That sounds pretty useful. Learning domains, so looking for entities as they emerge. So we do have approaches for doing that now, so we can keep track of them and find out if there are new genes that are, new proteins that are of interest. We can do these sorts of things. And finding relationships within text as well. So this might be something you're interested in if you're doing knowledge graph building. I'm interested in this strain. Can I find the relation to that and indications or drugs or whatever else I'm interested in? So something, again, we're using machine learning models to do. Almost certainly plenty of other things too, but these are some of the things we've been thinking about applying to this sort of data. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening.